for people to disbelieve because they won't look at everything properly.
All right.
And this particular photo disturbs me because, you know, I was a darkroom master photographer. I looked at film, real film, for 20 years before everything went digital.
Okay, do you think it's legit?
I've never seen anything like this. I'm looking at a photograph with a true photoelectric response from the alleged alien or alien doll, or was it, like Corso said, an AI?
Gee, David, why don't you share this photograph with me?
I will. I will, and I'm making a movie about it, but I want to do it piece by piece, part by part, because this thing really got messed up. This Boyd Bushman story really got messed up. But I believe exactly like he said, they are part AI, and they, just like we are now doing, we're now making transistors that interface with living DNA for a very good reason, because of the properties of DNA. In fact, the very first successful transistor that John Bardeen and Will Bratton invented was immersed in water. It worked in water, but when they took it out of the water, it didn't work.
Wait, David. I'm sorry to stop you again, but you said we're making transistors that interface with human DNA.
I didn't say human DNA. I said DNA. And
okay, DNA.
DNA is in the middle of every cell. You have the middle of the cell. You have the mitochondria, the power plant of the cell, driving the DNA and the RNA, which builds the protein. So your DNA. Now, this was a study done by the discoverer of the AIDS virus. Luc Montagnier won the Nobel Prize for discovering the AIDS virus, and he does tests on DNA by inducting it with the frequency of Earth, inadvertently 7 hertz. It was lower than the frequency of Earth. So long wave radio, and the DNA responded to an ultra low frequency like that.
Really?
And that was shocking.
Actually, that's not shocking. I mean, why would that be shocking? We are creatures of the earth. We come from the earth. Depending on what you believe, God did it all in however many days, or we have slowly emerged from the muck of the earth. So we are part of the earth, are we not?
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
So I'm not surprised.
Our DNA would read that frequency, and it shocked the researchers for only one reason, is the wavelength of DNA is so small as a coil, if you look at it as an inductor coil, and we can explain inductance really easily, that inductance is like, and I've done this in my house. So you take one coil, one like copper coil, wind up some wire around a cylinder,
right,
and connect it to a signal generator, generate a frequency and set it in front of your computer speakers, and you'll hear a tone. You'll hear.
I can explain it even easier. The new Androids use induction to charge. In other words, you take your Android phone, you put it on you just lay it on this thing, and it charges magically. That's induction.
Yeah, that's induction. Induction is transferring energy from one coil to another, and one of them doesn't have any power in it.
That's right.
But this is even a different function of induction. Is I get two coils in the house, right?
Same idea.
I got one in front of my speakers, and I got a signal going through it. My speakers, you can hear the buzzing in the speaker. I go somewhere else in the house, and I plug another coil into another signal generator, and when I match the frequency at a distance, I can hear the second coil in the other room through my speakers, and they're the same frequency, but they're not in phase. They're slightly out of phase.
That would
and
make
that's
sense.
Because when you have any two oscillators of any kind, it doesn't even have to be quartz, that are the same frequency, you set up a line of communication.
Okay.
So that's where it gets really interesting when you get into the subject of induction, transferring energy from one coil to another. Because if human DNA can be inducted by the frequency of Earth, which it makes sense, like you just said, right?
Yes.
And the frequency of Earth is where we dream. 7.83 hertz is fundamental, but it actually, there's a whole range of frequencies because we have a sphere. When you have a sphere, your wavelength at your equator is like 7.5 hertz, a little under 7.5. And then by the time you're in Norway, you've got really higher frequencies up there. But what's amazing about the frequency of Earth and the fact that DNA will read it is phenomenal. Because what that means, Art, is what I did. This is an experiment I just did recently. I take the wavelength of Pluto, because we were going to Pluto with New Horizons, and I did this right in tandem when the New Horizons was going by Pluto. I'm lying in my bed. My daughter's asleep next to me and my wife, and I'm pulsing my body with one of my transmitters with the frequency of Pluto. And suddenly I go out of body. I'm at Pluto, and I'm behind Pluto looking towards the sun. And Pluto has a huge atmosphere and all these beautiful colors. And in 5 seconds later, I'm back in my body. I'm like, that was perfectly clear. I was out in space looking at Pluto, and NASA doesn't believe it could have an atmosphere. How could it have an atmosphere? It's an icy planet. Well, 3 days later, when New Horizons went beyond Pluto, looking back at the sun, they were shocked. It had an atmosphere 1,500 miles deep, just as I had saw it, remote viewing it with the frequency of Pluto.
Okay, so you remote viewed it. You weren't actually at Pluto.
Well, no, it looked like I was
Pluto.
there. Like I didn't see it in my mind. It's like suddenly I was jolted out of my body. There was this jolt, and I couldn't see my body. There was no astral body.
Oh, okay.
I was looking at Pluto in all perfect clarity, like a perfect movie.
All right, now tell me about these frequencies that I'm staring at in front of me.
Okay, what you're staring at is quite amazing because, using this system called parallax, NASA knows the radius of 5 Pleiadian stars. So let's start with Pleiades. And the biggest star in Pleiades is Alcyon. And Alcyon, what I've given you there are the tones where I take the wavelength of the star. And at the equator, you would never hear that because that's ultra, very low frequency radio bands. Typically VLF is 3 to 30,000 hertz and Earth is 7.83 hertz. So look at the size of Earth. So when you look at the size of a star, and the Pleiadian suns are younger and bigger than our sun, they're very low frequencies. But the higher up the side of the star you go, the wavelength gets smaller and you can hear it.
All right.
And in fact, NASA actually recorded using a satellite the emissions coming from our sun and recorded the sound of our sun, which means all stars.
Right, we have that also. Let's do one at a time. You're claiming that the sound I have here from Pleiades.
And it's based on the mathematical radius of those 5 suns scaled. So when you play this, a lot of the file is inaudible, but it will transmit when you play it. The part that you're hearing is the higher, frequency bands up near the top, near the poles of the stars.
Right. My question is, where did you obtain the recordings? We're about to play.
I didn't obtain the recordings. What I did is I got the radius on NASA's website, and based on the radius, I calculated the frequencies, scaled the frequencies mathematically, and then generated them in a frequency generator and recorded it.
Okay.
So
all
I did it
right,
mathematically.
So then we've got the frequency, accurate, according to you, of Pleiades, or it's Alcyon, right?
Yeah, it starts with Alcyon. You're going to hear 5 tones,
right,
and they're all different because each one of those Pleiadian stars are different sizes.
And how will this affect people?
Well, what it actually does, especially if you induct the frequencies into people, is you start tuning to that star system, right? So your brain and your nervous system starts becoming tuned to Pleiades, and that's how I made contact with Pleiades.
All right, I'm going to play this first one. Is that all right?
Yeah, there'll be 5 tones.
I understand. Okay, here we go. Here, everybody stand by, and whatever happens, happens, I guess. I didn't like that last one so much.
Yeah, actually they sound if you listen to the sound of the sun, it's pretty powerful.
That's where we're going next. You say this is the sound or the frequency of our own sun. What we're about.
Well, it's a blend. You see, you never get one frequency in a sphere. You get a huge bandwidth of frequencies, and that's why you get a scaling of frequencies. So NASA did this recording of our sun that you're going to play.
Of our sun. Okay, this is from NASA. Is that correct?
Yeah, it is from NASA.
Here you go, folks. We've got awfully good audio equipment, frankly. Awfully good. I wonder if that's coming through. People will have to tell me on the wormhole if that's actually coming through. Our audio gear really is good, but you know what? The sound of the sun does, to me, sound like the sun. It really does. If you think of the desert and a really radiating, horrid, hot day, it might sound like this. Sweat on the brow. Hot. Yeah.
See, what NASA did there, Art, is you normally wouldn't hear the wavelength, so they compressed the data so that it was a little more dense. But actually, Pythagoras said in deep meditation, he actually heard the sun. He's one of the first to say it. In the Rig Veda, one of these ancient Hindu manuscripts, the mantra Om that people chant is actually a resemblance of the sound of the sun itself. And it goes deeper and deeper in different religious philosophies. The Logos, the actual Logos, this was the original Lord's Prayer in Aramaic in Christianity. Jesus is saying, "O thou from whom the breath of life comes, who fills all realms with sound, light, and vibration." And he actually addresses Logos in John 1. And Logos actually is the sound of the sun. It's the sound of the cosmos. But for us, actually, all the planets are making sounds and frequencies, and so is the sun.
Right.
What's remarkable, when I measured the wavelengths of all 9 planets, they match perfectly with all 5 human brainwave states. And that cannot be a coincidence.
That is really interesting, actually. Yes.
It's tremendously interesting. And the fact that we dream at the frequency of our own planet means, do Palladians dream at the frequency of their planet and their sun? And do all beings who live all over the universe
That would be
dream?
Logical, certainly.
It would make sense.
In other words, we're all products
in
of
theta.
Yeah.
We don't dream in delta. We dream in theta, the frequency of Earth. And there's a huge bandwidth there. It's not one frequency like a lot of people think, 7.83. There's bandwidth. Jupiter and Saturn are deep delta planets. Mars is alpha beta. Mercury is like just under 20 hertz where we allegedly start hearing, although I can hear much lower frequencies than that. And when I measure, I take NASA's radius. So here's how you do the frequency at the equator. You just take NASA's radius, which is exact on the 9 planets, and you go times 2 to get the diameter of the planet, times pi to get the distance around the planet. Now you take the speed of light divided by that, and that's the resonant frequency of the standing wave at the equator. But because it scales, the distance around the Earth gets smaller as you get near the poles. You get this huge range of blending, pulsing frequencies. So that's what I did for Pleiades. I did it for Sirius A and B. And
I've got Sirius A and B here. Is it long? Do I have time?
No, it's very short. Very short.
Very short. All right.
It's a sample. Yeah.
Let's do it. Here it comes. This will be. Okay, so that's Sirius A and B, is that correct?
And B is almost the same frequency of Earth. I mean, Robert Temple brought this up in the Sirius Mystery. It's so close to our frequency because it's such a tiny little star that in a way we're already naturally tuned to it. And it makes sense because if you zoomed out in space and you look back at our sun and you look at Sirius A and B and Alpha Centauri, we're like a little constellation. The distance between our stars is very similar to the distance between different Palladian suns in that little cluster. So we're so close. Like when you look at how each star is a different size, And that was actually breaking up a little bit. There's a little bit of scratching going on in there, and because they're very powerful frequencies. But anyway, when you hear them in all their purity, they're with good speakers and everything. They're very, very nice tones. But see, what it means is that
Exclusively on the Dark Matter Digital Network with Art Bell. Invite you to call now. 1-952. Call Art. That's 1-952-225-5278.
All right, so I want to roll over this one more time with David. And the way these tones are derived, other than the sun, which was actually measured by NASA, very interesting. But these other tones are derived by measuring the planet itself. In other words, very much like our own Earth, measuring the size of the planet and various things, and then coming up with the tone, much as you would for Earth. Is that correct, David?
The wavelength, you can even read this on Wikipedia, that the circumference of the planet is the basis for the frequency, because the electromagnetic signal is basically oscillating around the planet. And it doesn't do it perfectly evenly, and it's not just at the equator, because you have a sphere, you get higher and higher frequencies as you get near your poles.
Okay.
So it's a whole blending of frequencies. Like, for example, this is quite shocking, what I'll tell you now, is I'm the first one to do this. I took the capstone base of the Great Pyramid, 572.2, primitive inches, which is almost the same as our inch. There's a difference of 1.00106 inches, so it's almost identical. And the way you calculate the electromagnetic frequency, which is speed of light of a standing oscillating wave around a structure that has excited electrons in it. So the pyramid is made out of three different materials: the radioactive granite in the core, which is quite radioactive according to Robert Temple's measurements. And then it's surrounded by the two layers of limestone, which are all semiconductors, by the way, and which means they have electrons, unbound electrons on their surfaces. And the electrons get excited by the presence of fire or electricity. So there's two ways to excite the electrons in the Great Pyramid to cause it to generate frequencies. So what's shocking is the slope angle of the Great Pyramid is 51 degrees and 51 minutes. So if I take the square base of the capstone of the pyramid, which is 2,288.8 primitive inches, so 572.2 times 4, and then I change it into modern inches, and then I resolve the speed of light in inches, and I calculate the frequency, it's 5151. It's 5.151 megahertz square. That's the same number as the slope angle, which means the builder knew the speed of light, because we didn't know the speed of light even accurately until after 1972. So when Einstein was making a lot of his calculations, we didn't even have an accurate speed of light. The speed of light has to be so perfect in order for me to get the number that I got on the Great Pyramids.
It is very interesting. I'll give you that.
The builder knew the speed of light.
Okay, we have
5.151 megahertz square. So what does that frequency do? Why did the Egyptians make such a massive crystal oscillator and we make tiny ones?
Yeah.
Because when you get that many electrons in a massive semiconductor oscillating, you can open up a vortex wormhole, I believe.
Well, that's a reach yet, but we've got two other sounds here, right?
Mm-hmm.
What are they?
We have Vega. Can you see Vega?
Sure.
Vega was the star in the movie Contact. I love the sound of Vega. I mean, on my speakers, it's beautiful.
All right, let's see how they sound on everybody's speakers. This is going to be Vega. actually is pretty cool. So that's Vega.
Yeah, and I could scale it even better. I mean, if I had supercomputers, I could get more and more bands of resolution going up the sides of the sphere, and it would be even smoother sounding than that.
All right, I'm going to do Vega again. I liked it. I kind of liked it. Vega, one more time. You could actually hear a little static in the middle of that. That was interesting.
Yeah, that's probably just a little bit of. I don't hear that when I'm playing it here, but it's going through a huge network. What's amazing is you're sending out the frequency of Vega through a huge network, and that frequency is hitting our whole planet right now, which is pretty amazing.
And that's fine.
And
all
does
right.
that open a line of communication between us and Vega? And that's what I found.
Okay, well, that's what I don't get, and we'll come back to that because we have one more sound, right?
We have one more sound. What is the name on that one?
Spica.
Spica.
Spica, yes.
Spica is in Virgo.
Okay, let's do that one, and then we'll talk about it. Here it is, I think. That one's a little annoying. Anyway,
well, those radio astronomers, when they're listening to some of the pulsars and different sounds coming out of the stars, I mean, it's definitely enough to rattle your brain. When I do this, I don't listen to the sounds. I induct my nervous system with a coil, so I don't hear anything because I magnetically transfer the frequency.
All right, but here's what I don't get, David. Here's what I don't get.
Mm-hmm.
All right, I get how you came up with the sounds, but you seem to be inferring that if you have this sound and you inductively couple it or whatever you do to get it into your body, and then Vega or whatever you're playing at that moment is also, of course, emanating that sound, you seem to be implying that there's a communication.
Well, see, that's how radio works. Whenever you have two distant frequencies that are identical from an oscillator, a crystal oscillator, you set up the communication and the transistors amplify that, and then you hear it in the speakers. But then you have to modulate your voice or your music or your pictures onto the radio wave or the microwave. So that's how we do it today. But that's too slow. So what we're saying is that there's a faster component in the quantum, function of the atom that sends the signal faster than light because those stars are too far away. Now you're only hearing a tiny part of the frequency of Vega. You're only hearing the part that your speakers can play.
Okay.
The rest of the frequencies are on the file. And believe me, you can try this. You can take a signal generator and put 2 hertz into your speakers and take the cover off your speakers, and you'll see the speaker cone moving around.
Yeah,
so
I know.
A coil will transmit ultra low frequencies, even very low frequency.
Right, I get all that. What I don't get is how those frequencies at point A and point B communicate with each other at faster than light.
The frequency doesn't do it. The frequency sets up the resonance of the two points because that's how radio works. Any 2 points that are the same frequency set up the communication. The biophotons or the quantum function sends it to Pleiades or Vega because that's it. The universe doesn't get mixed up. There's no other star with those exact frequencies because they're all different. This is how the universe created tuning. It created each star with a different sound, a different set of frequencies. And that's why you don't hear, remember the old days you got your cordless phone and you could hear your neighbor, if they were too close?
Yes.
And that's because they didn't have enough separation in the frequency. So if there was another planet or star with the same frequency that you were tuning to, we would all be entangled together in that moment. But the universe didn't create planets and stars the same size. In fact, every star NASA measures, they're never the same. They're all different. And when I scale them, they all sound different because the numbers are all different. And
well,
so
if they relate to the size and mass, then yes, of course they're different. They would have to be.
They're all different.
Yeah, they would have to be.
And that sets their own unique frequency apart from every single other star out there.
Okay.
Now, it's true that some can be incredibly close. Like Sirius B and Earth are almost the same. They're not really, in the world of radio, you would, if you were tuning down the radio band, you would skip over it. But in the old days with, very low frequency radio, you get a lot of static, but you can hear the other side of the planet. Like, why could you hear, I remember having one of those radios in Long Beach, Vancouver Island. I'm listening to a radio station in Japan. And that's because those long waves wrap around the sphere. Whereas the higher frequencies can't do that. The wavelengths are too short. They won't go around the planet. So that's where it gets really, really amazing, is that when I started doing this, Art, I was, I didn't know what was going to happen. I wasn't like trying to point. All I did is I took a recording of my wife, Crystal, singing this beautiful jazz song, Fly Me to the Moon by Frank Sinatra. And I met my wife at the House of Blues with Dan Aykroyd and beautiful jazz singer. And I just thought, what a great song to send out to the Pleiades. So I did this a different way. I actually encoded her song into the ratio of all the stars, and I sent it out on this transmitter in Sedona, Arizona. And I sent it out, and I said, well, that's probably going to be the end of that fun experiment. And in the middle of the night, I hear an audible voice, not my mind talking to itself, not an intuitive, when you talk to yourself intuitively. This was a very mellow male voice saying, congratulations, we received your message. Now what do you want to ask us? And I leaped out of bed. I was in that half in, half out state.
I thought you were going to say it was Frank Sinatra from the other side. No, huh?
It didn't sound like Frank Sinatra, and that would have been nice. And so what I did the next day is like, oh, my God, I'm going to record all these questions. Like, where have you been? How come you appeared to me as a kid in 1968 with a flying saucer? Why did you make that contact and then ignore me the rest of my life? I'm recording these in Pro Tools with a good microphone, and I send the questions out through the Palladian harmonics, and holy cow, it's like I opened up a paranormal wormhole in Sedona, and it lasted a long time.
Okay, well, I can't confirm or deny, there's certain aspects of what you say, David, that I understand, and then you make a leap that I don't understand. And
if I call you on the phone and I say, I tell my buddy, mow the lawn this way, you go 4 times on the side and 3 times on the end. And then, he does it wrong. And I said, well, that's what I said on the phone. But you didn't hear me right. You see, when we say that the proof is that we believe that our telephones work is we hear each other. So in the end of the telephone, you need a consciousness to hear the phone call. And if there's no consciousness, did anybody really call you? And did they tell you to mow the lawn this way or that way? And that's where it gets interesting, is because most of what the Palladians have told me, and I've had many, many experiences, including my little 4-year-old daughter, don't even tell her what I'm doing. And she wakes up in the middle of the night and saying, Daddy, I saw a bright light coming, and I jumped up, and that's why I got scared in the middle of the night. I've seen so much proof that this works, and this is how communications works. The next step to prove it to the world is you need that DNA transistor to amplify this ultra-weak signal that the brain is picking up. You see, the brain is able to perceive in delta less than 1 hertz, less than 1 wave a second, right? But my point is the brain is sensitive enough to electrically pick up ultra-low frequencies, which are the wavelengths of big planets and stars, actually. But you can't tell me what the brain is picking up. You only know that the brain can measure a frequency that low. But what if you have a DNA transistor connected to that, and then I can actually determine what consciousness...
A DNA transistor.
A transistor that's connected to DNA, which is then connected to... See, you can connect an electrode to your brain.
Yes.
And do an EEG, but that's just going to measure the frequency of the brain. remember, like radio works at different frequencies, right? You have
okay, you got me there, and you're about to lose me. All right, because what do you mean by a DNA transistor?
Well, you have to Google this. A DNA transistor means you would take the transistor and you would connect it to tissue that is alive, that has DNA cells inside of it that are living to the transistor. Now you have to remember the very first transistor that John Bardeen and Will Bratton got working, and there's three of them. I don't know why I'm blacking out the last guy, because there's three inventors of the transistor. It worked in water only, and water's full of DNA. It's full of little, cells running around in there, unless you've got distilled water. So what I'm saying is that that's how you do it. You got to amplify the tiny, tiny data and information that comes into the human brain that assembles itself as pictures in the mind.
Yeah, but we're millions of miles from being able to do that.
We're not. That's what I'm saying. Look up DNA transistors. They're
well, I mean, I think they are theoretical physicists are thinking about this stuff, but I don't know of anybody who's actually done it.
Talk to I'm trying to remember his name. He's the solid state physicist from Stanford who was in the movie What the Bleep Do We Know. His name, I don't know why it's
all right. Well, think about his name. I'll take a break here. Whew. It's kind of like I go down the road, I get part of the way down the road, and then I suddenly don't know where I am. I'm Art Bell, and this is Midnight in the Desert. We'll open the phone lines. Maybe you.
Darkest time between dusk and dawn. From the high desert, it's Art Bell's Midnight in the Desert. Now, here's Art.
Did you know that particular one came from somebody on Belgap? That was the one that I really liked. And that went to Ross. It got produced, and here it is for you. All right, I can't resist doing this. I really, really, really liked the sun. So here it is one more time. All right. Anyway, welcome back, David. Again, I'm going to try this one more time with you. I understand frequencies. I understand how you are deriving these frequencies, the measurements you're using to derive these frequencies. That makes sense to me. What doesn't make sense is if there's a frequency at Pleiades and there's one here on Earth, how are you exceeding the speed of light to be in communication with, I'm guessing you're saying ETs there, right?
Exactly, yeah.
Okay, how do these two communicate with each other? How at the, greatly exceeding the speed of light? How does that happen?
See, the speed of light, the electromagnetic part of it, is not what's doing it. It's actually the DNA. In fact, I just found this article, DNA Transistors, New Scientist, April 2nd, 2013.
I know they're talking about it. I am aware of that.
Okay. So, here's one of the, this is one of the ways I could explain it. And there were studies done in Florida by, his name is David Cole, computer scientist, who connects human brain waves to EEGs and dolphins. Okay. And when the dolphins get near the humans,
yes,
the dolphins seem to cause the human brainwave to change to theirs. And the researchers don't seem to notice what's really going on here. And another study, separate study, they did this with children. And once again, the children's brainwaves suddenly changed to the state of the dolphins. Now, what's interesting about this to me is the dolphin doesn't change to the human brainwave state. It's the human human that changes to the dolphin's brainwave state.
There actually are those who think dolphins could be conceivably smarter than humans. I'm sure you know that.
Oh, well, tonally and frequency, they have a far greater frequency capacity than humans. Their brains are nearly the size of ours, and they exhibit some of the same different frequencies of brainwave states that we do. But I believe, see, this is what happens with electrical inductance. If a stronger magnetic field coil comes into proximity with a weaker magnetic field coil, the stronger one will usurp the weaker one and transpose its magnetic field on the weaker one and increase its energy. And there's two ways that happens. It's not just the field strength, it's the coherency and the organization of the dolphin brainwave that is much more peaceful and serene and organized. But the most important part of the experiment to me is what the subjects experience when they get in the presence of dolphins. You get children that are autistic that suddenly become coherent and start communicating.
I've heard that.
And that means that through living magnetic field inductance, you're transferring consciousness from one being to another.
Okay, that I might be willing to buy, actually. Let's go. Take a couple of calls, David.
Yeah.
Tulsa, Oklahoma. David Serada.
Hi, Art.
Hi.
I'm just, I'm still, tonight's guest, I'm a little confused. I feel like we're starting at A and then jumping all the way to Z, and I'm just sort of lost. And if you could go back over the deal with DNA transistors, because to me, we keep going back and forth between oscillators and transistors, and in my world, they're two different things. And, you know, other than being a micro tiny switch attached to the, you know, recombinant chemical, I don't know what that would do. I mean, that doesn't, to me, seem like it would have any effect, and I'll take my answer off air.
Okay.
Well, first of all, transistors have multiple functions. In the early days, they were used to amplify radio signals because that's all we had as a means of communication. I mean, now transistors in your computer are used for colors and amplifying colors and generating colors and tones and everything in your computer. So you can't say a transistor is just an amplifier. It has unbelievable functions, and there's billions of them in a single chip.
Right, but he wanted you to connect it to DNA, and I wasn't getting that either.
Because, DNA, this is how you would build an old magnetic field sensor, is you would just wrap a copper coil around a magnet, and the magnet and the coil would vibrate in the presence of a magnetic field, and that's how you would detect the presence of radio waves or any type of frequency. And that's how, you know, we make sensors today. So your DNA is a coil. It is literally a coil. And Luc Montagnier proved, the winner of the AIDS Nobel Prize who discovered the AIDS virus, that DNA reads very low frequencies because it's a sensor coil. Now, if you take the DNA and then you attach it to a series of transistors and amplify that tiny, tiny signal, I mean, it's so tiny, you eventually can see it in a computer system.
Okay, but what you're discussing now is off in the theoretical world. It has not yet been done.
Well, when you look at some of the articles about, you know, like this one in New Scientist, DNA transistors pave the way for living computers, it's not, I mean, the direction I'm saying to use it is theoretical, because what I'm saying is I'm having so many people doing this, pulsing their body with inductance with these coils, the frequencies of distant stars, and having experiences behind sleep and even things happening in the house, that it would prompt you to say that there's got to be something going on here, because it's not just me. There's hundreds of people having experiences like I'm talking about, remote viewing with frequencies, a distant planet or a distant star. So I believe one of the greatest mistakes we've made in physics is that we have ignored what Einstein, Niels Bohr, and Max Planck have said about consciousness, as we just keep pretending, you know, the universe isn't conscious. But this is the funny part. When they're measuring the Big Bang and they're saying the first second, they're acting like somebody's watching the universe banging. But if there's nobody around and you don't believe the universe is conscious, nothing's happening, because there's nothing there to observe it. And that's the funny part to me about physicists is when they say that there's no consciousness. What do you mean? You're a consciousness. You're looking at the experiment. If you're not looking at the experiment, it isn't happening. And they're saying there's no consciousness. And Max Planck was crazy, and Einstein didn't really mean to say that. I mean, believe me, I've sat around and worked with some of the best Nobel Prize winners in the world on nuclear fusion and landmine and bomb detection. I know a lot about how electronic systems work and how they're developed. And I know these guys they tell me, I mean, these are current winners of prizes in physics, that they were just being philosophical when Einstein said that about consciousness, and that when Max Planck said that. And I think that's where we made the biggest mistake, is we don't realize that the human nervous system is an electrical system. It can be inducted, like in the
Are you really in a truck? You really are.
Yes, sir. Hey, before Art, I'm in Texas. This show is phenomenal. David's brilliant. I've been thinking about this for a long time. I have my own hypothesis of communication via quantum entanglement. And I've been thinking for a long time about global warming and how radio frequency and the bombardment of radio frequency in our atmosphere is affecting our climate and our polar shifts because of the heat and the magnetism of our radio frequency. So being able to cut down on our frequency pollution and communicate via quantum entanglement is key. Now, he was talking about DNA transistors, which will eventually allow us to be able to create our first quantum computers. Now, that is one way to start, but I'm more of in the theory that we are capable of being able to communicate via quantum physics biologically. When he was speaking about
okay, well, that actually, you are, hold on. You're completely in sync with him. That's actually what he's talking about, is communication with alien beings through biological methods. I believe that is correct, right, David?
Well, I'm using both. I'm taking the frequency of the star, which most of it you can't hear because it's below the speaker and the human brain's ability. I transmit it from a sacred geometry coil under my bed into my body, and then, when I don't do it, I don't have these experiences, and when I do it, I have the experiences. So I know it works, and many of my users know it works, but the question is, how do you explain it, and how do you prove it?
Not easily, and not easily.
And part of what the caller is talking about, I believe a lot of the chaos in the electromagnetic transmissions around the planet are what's causing a lot of the heat. Because chaos produces heat.
Well, if radio waves could be seen, we'd all be ducking. Trust me, it would just be a soup out there.
Absolutely. I mean,
Denver, Colorado, you're on with David.
Hey, Art. Love the show. I'm actually one of the people from the TuneIn app, so I got Joe Rogan to retweet that for you to get you some more listeners. I love Joe.
That's great. Thank you.
My question for David was, after listening to him talk about the frequencies, I was wondering that if he could kind of help me out with a theory that I have that maybe UFO crop circles are nothing more than the frequencies of David's circle talk from the whole night?
Huh. Interesting. David?
Well, see, that's just it. I started there. Like, I took the wavelengths of the crop circles, the real ones, and you can calculate those frequencies easily. It's just the speed of light divided by the distance around the circle, and you got to use good resolution. You can't just use feet. You got to go right down to, millimeters would be really good to get super accurate frequencies, and look at the numbers. And when you look at the numbers, you go, these are either harmonic numbers they're transmitting or non-harmonic numbers. And that's a whole other part of my work, that I discovered this music scale in the Great Pyramid that is far more harmonic than our modern music scale that we use today. And you can do this with distortion testing to prove it. So, I mean, there are examples of induction in consciousness everywhere. There's the case of the dolphins. There's in William Gizecki's movie, The Crop Circles, The Quest for the Truth. The little ball of light comes up to the guy in the tractor, and he falls asleep.
Right.
You see it happen. It inducted his brain and put him into a trance.
Right, got it. Can I ask you a question? When the pyramid was functioning, capstone on there and everything, and the pyramid was functioning, what was it doing?
I believe, and I've had this experience where I actually met Anubis in a lucid dream when I was pulsing pyramid frequencies in my body. Mm-hmm. And he told me, with an oscillator that size, what it actually does is, see, we use oscillators to send two radio waves to communicate with each other, but it's not the frequency that's the communication. It's our voices and the guy's horn who just played his horn. It went through, it vibrated, and it got encoded on the radio wave, and when it got here, we disassembled it and played the sound back instantly, right? So
we use oscillators to establish the frequency that is then amplified and used for two-way communication, right?
Two-way communication.
Receivers,
but the frequency itself is not the communication. The communication is sound and pictures, which is modulated onto the radio wave. So, but that only travels at the speed of light. Absolutely. The quantum function is faster. So what I'm saying is, if you send the frequency of a distant star or planet into a quantum level vibration, then the quantum function will send the signal to that star faster than the speed of light. And that's how I believe the only way we're ever going to make ET contact is when we go in this direction.
Well, you might be right about that. I don't know. Honestly, whether we're ever going to make ET contact, but if we do, we're going to need something that goes really fast, and I think that's going to happen at the quantum level. So I agree with that.
We've already made ET. The point is, we've made the contact. It's happening to so many people, but they can't prove it.
Okay, let's go to Missouri. Hello, Missouri.
Yes, actually, it's Christy from Oregon. I just wanted to go ahead and ask you guys your viewpoints on how frequency waves connecting with binaural beats, lucid dreaming, out-of-body experiences of sleep paralysis. I've been practicing lucid dreaming for about 6 years now and, meditating with the binaural beats. And I have found some crazy reactions from it, that's for sure. I was just a little more curious about those frequency waves that we were hearing earlier and how they connect in and change our signals in our brain.
You want that one, David? David?
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, I hear you.
Well, see, there's way beyond binaural beats. I mean, I found the pyramid is a quadraneural transmitter. In fact, when I transmit the 4 uneven wavelengths of the Great Pyramid sides all the way up, I get this incredible breathing, rising and falling energy wave. And the brain seems to really, really love it. It really seems to relax and energize the entire body. So,
can you record that one for us?
I'll send it to you. Absolutely. Actually, the sounds would blow you away.
Awesome.
If you have really good, I use ESS speakers, and I can shake the whole house down.
We've got pretty good audio, so we'll shake them up.
Yeah, so I'll send you those.
Okay.
But the point is, over and over and over again, I mean, the caller just asked about sleep paralysis.
Yes.
When a being or consciousness with a greater magnetic field than your nervous system, which is not very powerful, the human nervous system, usurps it, you become paralyzed because there's far more energy coming from their magnetic field than yours. And therefore, they can transfer either a negative or a positive experience to you. through that taking over your electrical nervous system, but they wouldn't permanently take over your system. Like there's a story of Robert Monroe in Claude Swanson's book, The Synchronized Universe, where Robert Monroe is sleeping in this cage with all these wires wrapped around the sleeping area, right? And he goes out of body, goes through the wires, and then they put certain frequencies in the wires, and he can't get out of body. He's trapped. And
like,
that's what happens with disharmonic.
Hold on, David. Hold on. A caller? Yeah. Caller, go ahead.
I'm so sorry for interrupting.
No, go
I
ahead.
had ones where I was out of body experiences where I was pulling. I could feel literally like my soul, or whatever you may call it, pulling from my head and my body, and I could feel my physical body shaking, but I couldn't get out of it, but I was trying so hard to. Once I got out, I actually floated, of course, to my ceiling, which I hear is very common, and I could see my surroundings below me. When I woke up, I found that my surroundings were exactly how I envisioned them in my dream, but I meditated with these beats before most of my dreams that I had like this. But I was wondering if the pull is like that. I mean, is the pull where you're like, it almost feels real from pulling from your head, your body?
Well, see that you described the intense vibrations when you were going out, and that's when the electrical nervous system starts getting pulsed, and so it feels like a pulsing because there's a lot of energy moving through the spine and the nervous system, and then eventually you have enough energy and the right frequency to get out. But what I'm saying in the Monroe experiment is there are certain frequencies that will trap you and keep you stuck here, and there's other frequencies that can liberate you and get you out there. And I found what really binds us to this body, we can't get out. We can't get past the solar system, or we can't even get past Earth because we're all dreaming at the same frequency as our own planet. So how do you get past it? How do you get out there? And it's simple. The same way you change a radio station. You just got to use a different mantra, is what they would call it in India, in ancient India, in the Vedas, a different sound that would tune you, or a different drum beat in a native, American or First Nation circle. And the timing of that drum beat would be the timing of the wavelength of a distant star. And that's how you would do it. But see, I eventually think this is going to get to the point where these biotransistors, these DNA transistors, will be able to amplify the signal, the very weak signal that goes through the nervous system that may appear as a voice. You may hear a voice, or you may have a vision, but you'll eventually be able to amplify those ultra weak signals, and you'll be able to hear them, just like EVP and reverse speech, or all that stuff that was coming out years ago that you were having on your show. I mean, that's the beginning of consciousness interfacing with technology.
We're about to do an EVP show. All right, very quickly, Nick on Skype.
Hey, I just was wondering, I'm trying not to panic here, what David was saying about dolphins.
Mm-hmm.
Could he expand a little more on the whole communication with dolphins?
What was panicking you?
Well, I just don't want to panic hearing aliens and dolphins, making sure I have my towel.
Your towel?
Yeah.
I'm not following. I'm sorry.
Sorry.
Breaking down in tears?
Don't panic.
Well, yeah, what I'm saying about dolphins is that they're tonally far more advanced than us. I mean, they can sing in tone far higher frequency than humans. I mean, beyond 100,000 hertz, and also very, very low frequencies. But so we don't really have a lot of range. I mean, I have this online course where I teach people how to tone all these tones from the Great Pyramid scale and expand their brainwave range and their consciousness range. But dolphins clearly exhibit a far greater, far more harmonized magnetic field than humans. And what I'm saying in these studies is with children and even autistic children is the dolphins clearly exhibit a more superior, more desirable, peaceful brainwave state, and they can transpose it onto a human so they can experience it. And that's a form of biological,
I guess it is,
magnetic field abduction. And it's a kind abduction. And then there are certain abductions that are involuntary abductions that are not desirable.
Okay, Austin, Texas, your turn with David Serada.
Hello. Hey, Art. Hey, David. I was checking out David's website, and he has a course that he's offering. I wanted to ask, what's the average time of contact once you take your course?
What do you mean the average time of contact?
And do you mean?
I mean, what's the average time before you make contact with any entity?
Well, it would be different with every person. See, I believe the 60 hertz wiring around your house and the Wi-Fi and the cell phone and all the satellites transmitting are bombarding your nervous system and programming you. So to get you out of the program, you've got to retune the nervous system with these very sacred tones that I found in the Great Pyramid Scale. And then once you're a well-tuned nervous system, then you can start tuning. Actually, you can actually get the exact frequency of different moons, of different planets inside the solar system. I've had a lot of luck remote viewing the planets in our own solar system as well as distant stars. But I found first you got to be nicely tuned before it's easy to go out of body or remote view very distant.
Okay, well, so his question was, if he were to proceed with your course as outlined, I guess, on the website, how long before you could conceivably make contact?
I think the longest it's taken somebody to have an experience is around a month of doing it every day. But the course doesn't focus on contact in the first year. It focuses on tuning and harmonizing your nervous system to produce a very desirable state of consciousness.
I had some kind of a contact or OBE sleeping underneath a pyramid with a crystal on top, and that was back in '98. And, of course, there was no communication, but there was this extreme love coming from this entity looking at me. And he was sitting on a horse, of all things, and the horse would look like it appeared to be on a starship, which is a weird...
Oh, wonderful.
Yeah,
sounds like a fantastic experience to me.
That was the only time I've ever had that experience in my lifetime. That was back in '98,
and that was without DMT, right?
Yes, that's true, Art. One other thing, I did use your jewelry once, and I still have this weird effect.
My jewelry?
Not your jewelry, David's jewelry.
David. Okay.
Whether it was taken away. It was mysteriously taken away from me, but the effects is I project energy out of my eyes. In other words, your picture on Art's website there, you got that weird look. You know, it's kind of intense. Mm-hmm. Sometimes I have that look in my eyes, and people are almost sometimes either react good to it or they freak out at it. And I project expect energy that actually zaps them. And I don't know what to think of it or what to make of it anymore. You know, I almost feel like Sasquatch, like I'm Sasquatch and people are looking at me and spotted something crazy, and they could be hundreds of feet away from me. Sometimes I could lock them up with my energy, and I don't know what's going on.
Listen, we are woefully out of time. I'm terribly sorry. And then somebody's distracting me by calling me on Skype with a Skype name of Beating a Pale Horse. David, it's been a pleasure having you on the program, but we are absolutely out of time. So,
out of time.
Yes. So
thank you, Art. It's been wonderful being here. It's a real treat for me to hear your voice again, and I love your skepticism and how deep you go on both sides of the question.
Well, I try to understand. Sometimes I get stuck, David, and
it's great. It's great. I love it.
Okay. All right, buddy. Thank you.
Thank you, Art.
Take care. That's it.
This magical journey.
It goes on.
Will take us on a ride.
Every night, 5 nights a week. It's called Midnight in the Desert. Thank you all, and have a worldwide, through all the time zones, have a great night. See you tomorrow.